My fiancé broke up with me after claiming I ruined his life, but it turns out he was hiding something far worse. Now he's spiraling, and I've never felt more relieved. I, 28, had been with my fiancé, Alex, 34, since 2020. We met at a friend's party, hit it off, and had been together ever since. He finished his doctorate in economics just last year. Since then, he has been working at the uni. I have my master's in media sciences and decided to start working instead of going for a PhD. Okay. So the problem is that Alex broke up with me last Monday. It was literally so surreal and honestly, just weird. For the past few months, he'd been acting strange. He was making demands and then dropping them immediately. A few examples. He told me we were going to paint our walls back from dark green to white. When I asked why, he just said, "For fuck's sake, forget it," and never brought it up again, even when I asked. Another time, he came home and got mad because I was sitting on the couch with my head covered in a blanket. I had cramps. He was upset because I was just sitting there watching Netflix. Mind you, the house was spotless. When I tried to talk about it, he said, "Forget it, it's not a big deal." This kind of thing became common. Every time I tried to communicate, tried to figure out what was going on, whether it was something I did or maybe he was just stressed at work, he would just say everything was fine, but he was clearly seething with rage. I didn't even have to do anything. He would find something to complain about. The apartment, clothes, me, work, etc. So I gave him space, which apparently was also wrong. I told him I was going to help my parents with repairs for a few days, and somehow that was also wrong because he wanted to renovate the apartment too. Then, on Monday, I got a text saying we needed to talk. I knew what was coming, and after the last few months, I had made peace with it. When I came home, he was sitting on the couch. He didn't even wait for me to take off my jacket before saying, "I want to break up." Then the verbal diarrhea started. He told me he resented me. First, because I didn't pursue my academic career further, even though I was capable, and he didn't want to upset me at the time. Then, when I started making more money, since he didn't make much as a PhD student, he felt like I should have the last word financially, and he hated it. Mind you, I never said anything like, "It's my money, so I have the final say." That's a rule he imposed on himself, and he hated it. He said he hated our paint scheme, the couch, and even our fucking crock pot. Then, he told me he had rejected a better PhD program to stay here because I had already started my job by the time he got the acceptance letters. Only he never told me he had even applied overseas. He said a few months ago he checked in with a friend who's in that program, saw how they were thriving, and decided I ruined his life. He said I had too much control over his life and that he hated the idea that I could just decide not to pay for things and fuck him over. I honestly don't even know what that means. He also said he hated that all his friends loved me and didn't let him vent about me. Then he said again, "I'm done." I was floored. I had already made peace with the idea that we were ending, and it hurt. But after that rant, I was just disgusted. I looked at him, probably with a disgusted expression, and said, "Okay." He lost it. He said this is exactly what he meant, that it was horrible. We had been together for 4 years, and all I had to say was okay to our breakup. I just asked if he wanted to stay here while he figured out where to go. He said, "Typical, of course you're holding the apartment over me," and started ranting again, so I just left. I told my parents, and they're also confused. My dad suggested I reach out to our landlord and explain the situation to see what options I have. I can keep paying the rent no problem myself. He covered the utilities and some subscriptions. Just to reiterate, I never had a problem with this. I saw that he was chasing his dream, and that was more important to me than a 50-50 financial split. I make good money and I'm happy at my job. I never saw it as slaving away. I always had the mentality that my money was our money because we were building a life together. Of course, I had my own savings and fun money, but I honestly never cared. As long as I felt he was working towards something and wasn't taking advantage of me, I was fine with it. More than fine. Alex is still mad. He's going between texting me like a robot about the logistics of the split to being a seething asshole complaining about everything. I'm not even hurt anymore. I just feel nauseated by him at this point. I don't know. Should I have reacted differently? Update 1. I honestly thought that after the breakup, things would start calming down, But instead, Alex's behavior has gotten even stranger. It's like he flipped a switch that night, and now he's a completely different person. After he stormed out of the apartment that night, I didn't hear from him for about 2 days, which honestly, I was fine with. I spent the time trying to get my bearings. You'd think after the way he ended things, I'd be crushed, right? But instead, all I felt was this sense of relief, like a weight I didn't even know I was carrying had finally lifted. I went through the motions, updated my parents, talked to some close friends, and figured out what I needed to do next. But then, out of the blue, I got a text from Alex. It wasn't an apology or an explanation. It wasn't even about anything emotionally significant. It was a dry, almost robotic message about splitting up our furniture. He asked if I wanted to keep the couch, the same one he ranted about hating, and what I planned to do with the crock pot. Again, the same one he claimed he hated so much. It was so bizarre that I had to read the message twice just to make sure I wasn't missing something. I texted back, keeping it short and to the point. I told him he could take whatever he wanted except for a few personal things that I was attached to. I thought that would be the end of it, but no. His next text came in almost immediately, and it was a full paragraph about how he needed to take the TV and the sound system because apparently I had no real interest in them anyway. Which is funny because I was the one who picked out the sound system and he didn't even know how to use half of the settings. But whatever. I wasn't about to start an argument over electronics. But here's the part where things really started to spiral. I get another text a few hours later, and this one was full of complaints about how I should have fought harder to keep him. He said something like, "I can't believe you just accepted the breakup so easily. It's like you didn't even care about us." At that point, I was just exhausted. I couldn't figure out what he wanted from me. Was I supposed to beg him to stay after he told me he hated his life with me? I didn't even know how to respond to that, so I just left him on read. That night, I talked to my parents about the situation again. My mom suggested I reach out to Alex and try to have one final conversation, just for closure. But my dad, ever the practical one, told me to just block him and move on. And honestly, I was leaning towards my dad's advice. I didn't see how a conversation with Alex would lead anywhere productive. The guy was clearly all over the place, emotionally and mentally. He didn't seem to know what he wanted, and I wasn't about to waste more energy trying to figure it out for him. The next day, though, I got a call from one of our mutual friends. I hadn't spoken to anyone from Alex's side since the breakup, mostly because I wasn't sure how they'd react. But this friend, let's call him Tom, seemed genuinely concerned. He told me that Alex had been venting to everyone about how I had ruined his life, and how he made all these sacrifices for me that I didn't appreciate. Apparently, he's been telling people that I manipulated him into staying in our city, that I didn't support his career enough, and that I was basically holding him back from his true potential. Hearing this, I couldn't help but feel angry. Alex never once mentioned feeling this way while we were together. Not a single conversation about resentment or feeling trapped or anything like that. It was like he was rewriting the entire relationship in his head to make himself the victim. I asked Tom if anyone else was buying into this narrative, and he hesitated before saying, "Well, some of the guys think he's just stressed, but yeah, a few people are starting to take his side." That stung. I had always gotten along well with Alex's friends, and I couldn't believe some of them would just take his word without even asking for my side of the story. Later that evening, I decided to text Alex, mostly out of frustration. I wasn't going to let him spread lies about me to our mutual friends without confronting him. I kept the message calm but firm. I told him that I had heard what he was saying, and if he truly felt that way, he should have communicated it while we were still together instead of blindsiding me with a breakup. I also made it clear that I wasn't going to engage in some post-breakup smear campaign. His response? More verbal diarrhea. He accused me of being emotionally unavailable, said I never listened to his needs, and that I was too focused on my own life to care about his. He went on and on about how I didn't understand the pressure he was under to succeed, and how I had no idea what it felt like to be constantly compared to his colleagues who were all thriving while he was stuck because of me. By the time I finished reading his rant, I was exhausted. It was like he had been bottling all this up for years, and now it was just spilling out in the most unhinged way possible. I didn't even bother responding. There was no point. He had clearly made up his mind about how he wanted to view our relationship, and no amount of reasoning was going to change that. I blocked him on my phone after that. I figured if he needed to communicate about logistics, he could email me. At that point, I just wanted to be done with him. But here's where things take another turn. The very next day, I got a message on Instagram from a girl I didn't know. She introduced herself as a colleague of Alex's and told me that she had heard about our breakup from him. She said that he had been venting about how I held him back, and she just wanted to reach out because she thought it was unfair of him to place all the blame on me. Apparently, Alex had been confiding in her for months about his unhappiness in our relationship, and she felt guilty because she hadn't realized how serious it was. I stared at the message for a good 5 minutes before responding. I thanked her for reaching out but kept it short. Honestly, I didn't know what to make of it. Was this girl trying to stir the pot, or was she genuinely trying to help? And more importantly, why was Alex confiding in a colleague about our relationship for months without telling me a single thing? It just felt like yet another layer of betrayal. I didn't respond to Alex after that. There was nothing left to say. I blocked him on all social media, and I've been focusing on getting my life back together. It's hard, but I'm starting to realize that this breakup was probably the best thing that could have happened. Update 2. Alright, so it's been a few months since everything went down with Alex, and I figured it was time to close the chapter on this whole mess with one final update. After I blocked him, things were quiet for a while. I didn't hear from him directly, and I was slowly starting to feel like I could breathe again. My apartment felt different without his constant negative energy looming over it. I moved some furniture around, bought a new couch, because let's be real, the old one had too many bad memories, and repainted the walls. Yes, I kept the dark green. Funny how something as simple as a coat of paint made me feel like I was reclaiming the space as my own. But just when I thought I was moving on, I got blindsided by something I wasn't expecting. A few weeks after I blocked him, I ran into one of Alex's close friends, Sarah, at a mutual friend's birthday party. I was nervous at first because, as you might remember from the last update, Alex had been spinning this narrative that I'd ruined his life and held him back. I had no idea how much of that his friends were buying into, and I wasn't really in the mood to defend myself. But to my surprise, Sarah seemed genuinely happy to see me. She pulled me aside and asked if we could talk. No. Apparently, things with Alex hadn't been going great on his end. After the breakup, he spiraled even more. He'd been reaching out to mutual friends, trying to get them to take his side, but most of them were just confused by his behavior. Sarah told me that at first people tried to be supportive, thinking maybe he was just having a rough time adjusting after the split. But then he started getting weird. According to Sarah, Alex had become obsessed with proving that the breakup was my fault. He was telling anyone who would listen that I had manipulated him into staying in the city, that I'd sabotaged his academic career, and that I had been emotionally unavailable for most of our relationship. But here's where it got really wild. Apparently, he had also been making up stories, like actual lies. Sarah said that he told one of their friends that I had secretly been planning to break up with him for months, and that I was just waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger. I couldn't believe it. None of that was even remotely true, and I couldn't understand why he was going to such lengths to paint me as the villain. But then Sarah dropped the real bombshell. She said that she and some of their other friends had noticed that Alex had been spending a lot of time with the colleague who reached out to me on Instagram. The same one who said she had been feeling guilty about not realizing how serious things were between Alex and me. Turns out, they had been a little too close for comfort. Sarah didn't outright say that Alex had been cheating, but the implication was pretty clear. The timeline of their friendship lined up suspiciously well with when Alex started acting weird and distant. Suddenly, all of his strange behavior, the mood swings, the random outbursts, the vague complaints, started to make sense. He wasn't just stressed about work or feeling resentful over my career choices. He was likely dealing with the guilt of emotionally, and maybe physically, cheating. And instead of owning up to it, he projected all his insecurities and frustrations onto me. I can't even describe how I felt when Sarah told me this. On one hand, I was furious. I had spent months second-guessing myself, wondering if I had done something wrong, if I could have handled things differently, or if I had somehow missed the signs that he was unhappy. But now I realized that none of that mattered. Alex had already checked out of the relationship long before we broke up, and he had the nerve to blame me for everything falling apart. On the other hand, I felt relieved. I know that sounds strange, but in a way, it validated everything I had been feeling. It wasn't that I had failed in some way or that I wasn't good enough. Alex had made his own choices, and instead of being honest about them, he tried to twist the narrative to make me the bad guy. Knowing that gave me the closure I didn't even realize I needed. After hearing all of this, I made the decision to cut ties with the few mutual friends who were still in contact with Alex. I didn't want to be a part of whatever drama he was creating, and I certainly didn't want to hear any more about what he was saying or doing. It just wasn't worth my energy anymore. I also reached out to my landlord and officially took Alex off the lease. The apartment was mine now, and I couldn't have been happier about it. The final nail in the coffin came about a month after that conversation with Sarah. I got an email from Alex. Yes, email. Because as I mentioned before, I had blocked him on everything else. The subject line was closure. And I almost didn't open it because I wasn't sure if I could handle another rant from him. But curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on it. The email was long, rambling, and honestly kind of sad. He apologized in a way, but it wasn't the heartfelt apology I think I had once hoped for. It was more of a sorry you feel that way type of apology, where he acknowledged that he had been distant, but insisted that his actions were justified because of how miserable he had been. He didn't mention anything about the colleague, didn't take responsibility for any of the hurtful things he said during the breakup, and didn't admit to any of the lies he had been spreading about me. But there was one part that stuck out. He wrote, "I guess I just wanted you to fight for us more. Maybe things would have been different if you had." That's when I realized how warped his perspective truly was. In his mind, the problem wasn't that he had been dishonest or that he had failed to communicate his feelings. The problem to him was that I didn't fight harder to keep him in a relationship he had already sabotaged. It was almost laughable, but mostly, it just reaffirmed my decision to move on without looking back. I didn't respond to the email. There was nothing left to say. Since then, I've been focusing on myself, my job, my friends, my hobbies, and just rebuilding my life. And honestly, I'm in a much better place now. The breakup was messy and painful, but in the end, it was the wake-up call I needed. I deserved more than what Alex could offer, and it feels good to finally accept that. And I'm not going to lie and say I'm completely over everything. Breakups have a way of leaving scars that take time to heal. But I'm getting there, and that's what matters. I've learned a lot about myself in the process, and I'm confident that the next chapter of my life is going to be a much happier one, without Alex.